Okay, so my name is Dave Kirschen. I'm one of the elitefts sponsored powerlifters. Murph unwisely decided to give me some time to give my opinions on lifting weight, so I guess that's what we're going to do. My section is going to be an introduction to conjugate periodization for beginners. How many are familiar with the term conjugate periodization? Okay. Anybody familiar with the term West Side? West Side barbell. Okay, that's a term that gets used kind of interchangeably. I don't use it interchangeably. The basic difference is West Side barbell refers to one specific powerlifting club. Conjugate periodization refers to a method of periodization that can be used for powerlifting plus a lot of other things. We're going to talk about it with regards to powerlifting. I generally don't refer to it as West Side because for guys like me that have been doing this for a really long time, West Side barbell is kind of an important entity in our little world. So in my opinion, the only one really capable of teaching West Side is Louis Simmons or whoever Louis allows to do it on his behalf. Everyone else, we're pretty much just doing conjugate. What I'm going to present today is heavily based on the template that Louis wrote, but just out of respect for the club and what he's done for me personally, I don't trade on the name West Side barbell. When I'm doing something like this, I just call it conjugate. But again, people call it West Side as sort of a shorthand, and that's fine. I just won't trade on the name. So West Side or conjugate, it's an interesting program because on one hand, I don't know of any program that's used as successfully as at the expert level. And I don't know of any program that gets as fucked up at the beginner level. It's an interesting animal. It can either be done really well or completely horrible, and there doesn't appear to be a lot of middle ground. First off, who can give me a good definition of the term periodization with regards to training? Anyway, just call it.
Doing different things to people do different adaptations.
Yeah, okay. So different training methods for different adaptations for your body. Basically, any form of periodization, whether it's conjugate, whether it's block periodization, whether it's linear periodization, they're all to address the same problem, and that problem is accommodation or stagnation. If you do a certain exercise at a certain intensity long enough, you will stop making progress. Your body figures out how to do it as efficiently as possible, and then it just won't adapt anymore. So there's a lot of ways to get around that problem. Something like linear periodization would keep the same exercise, let's say the squat, and wave the intensity up over the course of the program. So you go from higher volume, lower intensity to lower volume, higher intensity. That's one way to do it. Block periodization goes more periods where you're using different movements, different intensities, and then as you get closer to the meet, you get into more specific training blocks for what you're trying to do. 5-3-1 uses, fives, threes, and ones. There's a lot of ways to do it. What conjugate does is kind of interesting, and I think this is one of the reasons that so many people who might not really have any business using it yet want to try it. With conjugate periodization, you're addressing all aspects of conditioning at once, okay? That's the most important part of understanding what conjugate is. So rather than having different phases where you're addressing conditioning, hypertrophy, strength, contest prep, you're addressing them all at the same time, okay? It's an interesting way of arranging training, and that's part of the appeal. The other part of the appeal is the amount of success this club has had for 30 years. This little hole-in-the-wall gym in Ohio producing some of the strongest lifters in the world for almost the entire history of our sport. So here are some of the benefits of conjugate. Unlike other programs which tend to stick to the meat lifts throughout the entire cycle, lifters on a conjugate program are able to pick specific special exercises that address their own strengths and weaknesses, okay? So let's say I'm a squatter and my hips are stronger than my back, which happens to be true. Doing the squat week after week after week might not address my back weakness. using something like a good morning as a max effort exercise will. So with a little experience, lifters can more effectively tailor the program to their specific needs in terms of the exercises. And I'm going to go over the actual training breakdown a little bit later. Another benefit of Conjugate is you're training maximally essentially every week. Every week you're going up to a max, just not in the same exercise. What that does is it keeps you stronger year round. So a lifter following a type of program that gradually waves the intensity up is going to see a big fall off in strength and then gradually rebuild over the course of the program. On a Conjugate style of program, you stay stronger year round, which means you stay closer to a meet year round. That's, in my opinion, a big benefit for beginners because I believe beginners should compete a lot. Especially when you're not handling really heavy weights, especially when you're not beating yourself up all that much yet. I think beginners should compete all the time because that meet experience is valuable, and the stronger you get, the tougher it gets to compete often. I'm good for maybe competing every 6 to 9 months. Otherwise, I just completely fall apart. Because Conjugate uses a wide variety of special exercises, it prevents mental burnout. Okay? It sort of appeals to powerlifters' personality, which, by the way, is batshit crazy. It appeals to our desire to train hard often. You can't squat heavy the entire cycle, but you can keep putting new exercises in that allow you to train hard essentially every week. I don't really care much for sets of 10 and 8 and 5. I just, if I'm not blowing out the blood vessels in my eyes and shitting my pants during a rep, it's just not that exciting to me. It also prevents painting yourself into a corner with percentages. On a percentage-based program, what can happen is if you have an off day or if you have an off week, you can fall behind in your percentages, right? So let's say you're supposed to do 80% for 5 reps at an exercise. Well, that's great, but if you just had a terrible day, if your car broke down on the way to the gym and you had a fight with your spouse and you know, the dog shit on your bed, or that's all happened to me on the way to the gym, you're not going to have a good day. But if you have a bad day on a percentage-based program, now you're behind, okay? Because you didn't get the designated reps for that day, which means you might not get the designated reps and percentage the next day, which can put you ahead up until the meet. With Conjugate, you're working to what we call a relative max, okay? And what that means is because you're not taking a given percentage with the meet exercise, you're going all out on a similar exercise, but one that you're not going to compete in. You're just doing whatever you're capable of doing that day, and that has a sufficient training effect. It's not going to put you behind if one day you just don't have it. Essentially, and this is worth writing down, the program adapts to the lifter as much as the lifter adapts to the program. As far as the weekly template, I thought there might be a screen, so I'm just reading off my PowerPoint, but it's pretty easy to take notes. It's not that detailed a program. Monday is max effort squat. Really, max effort squat / deadlift. And on max effort squat day, you will take some variation of the squat or deadlift. It could be a box squat, it could be a good morning, it could be a deadlift, it could be, you know, a deadlift off of pins, a rack pull. Some variation of the meat lifts, but not quite the meat lift. You'll take that and you will work up to a max. It's max effort, squat deadlift. You don't have to do a squatting exercise and a deadlift exercise. They both work the same musculature, so either one, either a variation of a squat, good morning, or deadlift, and then you're good. Wednesday is max effort bench press. Okay? Same deal. You will take an exercise similar to the bench press, but not a meat style bench press. So it could be a board press. You put 2x4s on your chest, lower the bar to press it up. It could be a rack press, you're pressing it out of the rack. It could be a floor press, you're basically doing a bench press laying on the floor. Any number of variations. That's max effort bench press. Friday is dynamic effort squat. Now on dynamic effort, you're no longer addressing maximal strength. You're addressing speed and power. So you're going to take a submaximal weight, about half of your max, and I'll show you how to wave it a little bit later. You're doing high sets, low reps, usually about 8 sets of 2. Now obviously with about 50% of your max, you're going to be capable of doing a lot more than 2. You don't want to because you want your speed to remain high. And for squat, 2 is going to be about the limit there. So it's going to be 8 sets of 2 as fast as you possibly can. Essentially, you're pushing on a submaximal weight as if it were a maximal weight. And what that does is it teaches your nervous system to produce power. Murph used the analogy before. A lifter lifting 100 pounds at 5 miles per hour is not producing as much force as a lifter lifting 100 pounds at 10 miles an hour. And when you start addressing speed in your training, what happens is your top end weights also go up because you've taught yourself to push harder on them, to push faster on them. Okay? If I can do a max bench press in 3 seconds as opposed to 4, I'm more likely to make it. And if I have a sticking point, let's say I have a sticking point halfway up, if I can generate more speed off my chest, I'm more likely to push through this sticking point and complete the lift. Okay. On the Friday same day, but on the Friday dynamic effort squat day, we squat off a box. That day is always a box squat. We don't need to vary the movement on that day because the training percentage is low. It's not a maximal weight, it's just a maximal effort. And we'll go over the technique of it today, but it's essentially a wide stance box squat. Sunday is dynamic effort bench press. Same rules apply. It's a submaximal weight, about 50%. Usually that's done in sets of 3. Because the bench press takes less time to perform, you can get another rep in. So usually about 8 sets of 3 for a dynamic effort bench. And it's the same principle. You're lifting the weight as fast as you possibly can. You're teaching yourself to just develop force out of the hole. Again, same principle. When you get to a meat bench or a meat lift, you will produce more power. Okay, everybody got that? That's the standard template. That's what Louis has been teaching for a long time. If you've read Elite, you've probably read some version of it. I'm going to show you some hacks to it. Because what I found is through coaching and through bringing lifters up and through communicating with lifters on Elite FTS, the fact that you're not performing the meat lifts during the training cycle is problematic for beginners. Because they don't have, well, I wrote it down, so I should probably read that. They don't yet have the technique on the meat lifts to be able to do them at the highest level in competition. Okay? They just don't have the reps in yet. Beginners do not have access to experienced coaching, generally. Okay? Louis will tell you that you don't need to squat to do a free weight squat in the gym to be able to do it at the meet. He's right, if your coach is Louis Simmons, or if your coach is someone of his caliber, okay? Because what he's able to do and what experienced level coaches are able to do is they're able to cue the special exercises and the speed lifts in a way that will carry over to the meat lifts. And the word carryover, that's important, okay? Because beginners generally don't have the ability to do that, nor do they have access to people that can teach them how to do that. Okay? And what I want you to get from my little thing here, I'm not criticizing Westside at all. They've proven they're the best year after year after year after year. They just now own the highest total at 275, 2960, which I can't even wrap my mind around that yet. So they've already proven that their template works. Okay? But again, they also have the coaching and they have the lifters and they have the experience to make it work. For people who don't have access to that, I think there's a couple of hacks that you can make to make it work a little bit more effectively at your level. As you gain more experience and as you get further in the sport, then the appropriate move might be to move back to a more traditional template because now you have the ability to make those lifts carry over. But my experience is that most lifters at the beginner and even some at the intermediate level don't quite have it yet. Okay? And so I'll show you how to incorporate more contest lift practice into the training cycle while keeping it basically a conjugate training cycle. Another issue is that beginners might not have access to a lot of the special equipment we use. Okay? If you train here, you do. If you're training at a Planet Fitness, you don't. So one of the issues beginners have to contend with that really isn't factored into the standard program is that you have to make more with less. You might only have a barbell and a rack. Like that might be all you have. You don't have safety squat bars, you don't have cambered bars, you don't have a lot of the stuff that gives us variety on the program, and it's a program that thrives on variety. It's also a program where the more experienced you are, the more you need that variety. Because experienced lifters sort of max out on exercises sooner than beginners do. I can take a beginner and I can have them squat for 8 weeks straight to a max, and they'll make progress the whole time because they've never done it. Every workout is going to be a learning process, and they're going to get stronger every time. If I do it with an experienced lifter, I'm going to drive them into the ground. They won't make progress past week 3. Okay? Because they're already performing so close to their potential in that lift, too much stimulation at that high level is going to burn them out. A beginner, it doesn't matter. So what we're going to do for the beginner cycle, we're going to pick 3 max effort exercises. I like to use a good morning variation, a box squat variation, and a deadlift variation, not the meat lifts. And for good mornings, you can do wide stance good mornings, you can do close stance good mornings. You could do a suspended good morning where you set the bar in the rack or on chains and muscle it up from the bottom. They'll suck, by the way. Squat, you can do box squat, you can do a wide stance box squat, you can do a close stance box squat, you can do a low box squat. I wouldn't really recommend a high box squat for beginners, but some pros do use it for overload. And then for the deadlift, a rack deadlift, a deficit deadlift where you stand on mats and the bar's on the floor, a mat deadlift where you put the bar on mats. It seems like it would be the same as a rack deadlift, but for some reason it's not. It's harder. Probably because the bar can roll freely where it can't on the rack. Okay? So it doesn't really matter which ones, especially in the beginning, because anything is going to make you stronger when you're beginning, but we're going to pick 3. The fourth workout, really it'll be the first when we do the template, is actually going to be the meat lift. Meat squat and deadlift, and then meat bench for the bench. Okay? But what we're going to do is we are going to adjust the percentages somewhat. Incidentally, the days of the week are not random on the program. It's set up that way because meets are on weekends. So you're doing your heaviest squat on a Monday, your heaviest bench on a Wednesday, and the workouts just keep getting lighter as you get towards the end of the week. Then you take a week off, and you've had the most rest from your heaviest work and the least rep from your lightest work. So the days are not random. I understand not everybody can set it up that way. I don't set it up that way, but that's why they are what they are. When we say Monday, we actually mean Monday, not just day 1. So that was the Monday work we just gave. The fourth week, it's actually really the first week, is going to be the actual squat. But you're going to wave the percentages up a little bit from 85 to 90 to 95.
You lost me there when you're saying it's actually the first week. What do you mean?
Week 1, let's say we're going to use a 12-week template. Week 1, you would start off with an 85% squat and 85% deadlift.
And that would be about 5 reps, right?
No, 1 rep. Yeah, here's why. It's a skill day. It's not a training day. We're not trying to get stronger. We're trying to reinforce the technique itself. Okay? So week 1, Monday, that would be a squat. Then the next subsequent weeks, you would have your deadlift, good morning, and box squat. Whatever order you want them in, doesn't really matter. Okay? So that's basically your first 4-week cycle, and then the next 4-week cycles, 2 4-week cycles will be identical, except for the percentage on the first day. Your Wednesday workout, your Wednesday bench, again, the first week is going to be that 85% effort on the meat style bench press. And then the next 3 weeks would be some sort of max effort variation. Board press, floor press, rack press, up to you. Doesn't matter. The Friday speed squat, that stays pretty much identical. Okay? So we're going to wave that one up between 45 and 55. So 45, 50, 55, then drop back to 45 the next cycle. The week before you take your skill lift, you'll scrap the speed workouts. Okay? So you'll do them the first week because you'll have started with the max. And then the week right before you do your the week right before you start week 5, you would scrap the speed. Just do assistance that day. So basically you're going to do it weeks 1, 2, 3, miss 4, 5, 6, 7, miss 8, 9, 10, 11, miss 12. The reason is speed work can be a little bit tough on the joints. Like I don't do speed bench anymore. I used to for a long time. It just started getting to me. So just to keep you a little bit fresher, you're still going to be going to a 100% effort that week, but you're going to scrap the speed stuff just to save your joints a little bit before you do your skill work. Everybody following so far? I'll write it down if you get in a little trouble with it. We're actually going to design a program ourselves at the end of this. Speed bench is going to be the same thing. 45, 50, 55 for weeks 1 through 3. Week 4 off. Then back to 45, 50, 55. I'm going to go into something that you see a lot on Westside, and it's probably more associated with Westside than the template. It's chains and bands. Who here has trained with chains before? Okay, so for the people that haven't, the basic principle of chains is you hang them on the bar. As the bar descends, chains gather on the floor and it gets lighter. As you raise the weight, you start lifting chains, the weight gets heavier. It's called accommodating resistance, and the reason it works is that as you get into a better leverage position throughout the lift, the weight becomes heavier to accommodate your strength curve. Bands do the same thing, but they add an element of explosiveness. Okay? Because the harder you push, the harder they pull back. It teaches you to develop more power. These are really good on speed day. I don't recommend beginners do a whole lot of it. Okay? I want you to understand what it does, but for your first couple cycles, I wouldn't use accommodating at all. The reason is you're going to gain so much strength just using the weights. Why pull every trick out of the bag your first couple times through it? Weights have worked for a really, really long time. And keep in mind that Westside didn't introduce bands until they were already Westside Barbell. They were already the strongest club in the country before they added all that stuff. I don't know if there's any threshold of strength. You know, I've seen different numbers thrown out, but basically you should have a few full cycles under your belt before you start implementing them. Now, when you do start implementing them, the biggest benefit in my mind is you can double and triple and quadruple the amount of exercises you have at your disposal. You can add a lot of variety. So you add one chain to all your squatting movements, you've just doubled the amount of movements you have. Because that would be a separate personal record for each lift. You add 2 chains, now you've tripled it. Each band, that's a different PR, so you've quadrupled it. You can get infinite number of combinations with accommodating, but again, for beginners, you don't need that much variety yet. Assistance exercises, which we haven't really talked about yet, at least in my section, that's more your bodybuilding type stuff. That's where you address more muscular hypertrophy, muscular conditioning. Basic guideline is do assistance exercises that work the same musculature as your max effort exercises. So for a max effort squat deadlift, you're going to do glute ham raises, you're going to do reverse hypers, you're going to do back extensions, you're going to do all the posterior chain stuff and abdominals. For bench press assistance, you're going to do tricep extensions, you're going to do maybe some lighter close grip bench presses, you're going to do maybe some light overhead work. It's muscle work, basically. It doesn't matter all that much, at least not as much as the first exercise. GPP, we had a little bit of discussion of GPP. GPP is general physical preparedness. GPP is basically the stuff that gets you into shape to get into shape. That's sled pulling, that's prowler pushing, that's all that stuff. I personally think it's overused for beginners. I think it's overused because it's easy to do. Anybody can just load some weights on the sled and just push it. I wouldn't really specifically address GPP unless you have trouble making it through your workouts or trouble making it through the meet. I just haven't seen that many beginners that need a whole lot of it that is not addressed in the workouts already. I remember a friend of mine went out to Westside Barbell and came back and he said that Louis told him to drag the sled for a mile a day. He was 5'9" and 190 pounds and 9% body fat. Well, it turns out he was, yeah, practically anorexic. Well, what happened was he went there and he was so annoying to them, Louis just gave him the sled, put him in the parking lot, just told him to drag it all day. Like he had no business dragging the sled at all. He was just trying to get rid of him because he was annoying. So if Murph ever gives you a sled with a 25-pound weight on it, tells you to go to the parking lot, now you know. Okay, so here's the fun part. We're actually going to build our own template now, okay? I think it'll actually connect a little bit better if we sort of go through the process together. Because again, the biggest problem I think beginners have is they don't know how to connect the dots. The reason 5 through 1 is successful is because it's easy. You squat to a 5, a 3, and a 1. Shako, it's tough, but it's actually pretty easy because you're just managing the percentages on the exercises that you're already doing. Westside is one of the few programs that you actually have to kind of connect the dots between exercises, and that's not always easy. So we're going to try and do a little bit of that now. So okay, so let's get a volunteer.
For what?
I can't tell you that. Nobody will volunteer. Okay, good. So, do you compete at all at powerlifting? Any plans to?
I want to get into Olympic.
Okay. Some more powerlifting based. Well,
It's my goal.
okay. What are your main mistakes on the squat?
Sorry?
What are your main mistakes on the squat? Where does it start to break down?
Yeah, I guess tilting forward.
Tilting forward. All right. How can we address that? What exercise would be good for that?
Good morning.
Okay. So let's. Do you have much at your gym, or is it just sort of barbells and weights and that's it?
There are little ways, but there are bands and chains, but it's hodgepodge compared to stuff here.
Okay. So our first exercise, we're going to make it a good morning. We're just going to make it a standard good morning. Okay. That's going to be your. Actually, we'll start that at week 2 because the first is just going to be a squat. So week 2 is a GM. What's another exercise? We're going to do a box squat now, but we still want to address her back a bit. So what's a good squatting movement that would maybe hit her back? Manta ray squat. Sadistic prick. Do a manta ray squat. I would even do that on a low box, which is going to force you to round a little bit more. Okay? Close stance, by the way. Wide stance and low boxes are not a good mix. Just a general, if you're using a wide stance, just break parallel. If you're going deeper than that, tighten your stance up. Your hips will thank you. Okay, so we need to do fourth exercise. We're going to do a deadlift. We have 2 movements that are really full range and really tax your back. I'm going to give you a partial pull, just to give you a little more top end strength and not address back quite as much. Give you a little bit of a break. I swear to God, that says rack pull. What about bench press? Where do you shit the bed in the bench?
My ass will come up.
Yeah, so, well, that's not really strength thing. That's technique.
I know.
How about strength? Do you fail off your chest? Do you fail here? Do you have trouble locking it out?
Yeah, I guess it would be off the chest.
Start with, this is a movement I like a lot. Murph?
Floor press?
Floor press? Okay. So we get a floor press. I'm going to throw one in. A movement I like a lot for developing strength off the chest is a half foam press. So you take one of those half foam rollers. I don't know what the fuck they're for other than benching with. I mean, it's a roller. It's supposed to roll. Put that underneath your shirt. Pause the bench on it. Really, and not even really pause, but actually let the foam take the weight and then drive out of the bottom. So a foam press is good. Man-pon, yeah, man-pon's good. So that's two fairly full range ones. I'm gonna give you a two board, a solid two board as your third. Again, just to give you a little bit more top end, because we already have two lower end movements. Okay, so your Friday, Sunday, it's always going to be a speed squat. It's always going to be a full range bench. We're going to do okay, so 45, 50, 55. This would be for first week. It would be so 8 sets of 2 at 45. I write it backwards, sorry. 8 sets of 2 at 50, 8 sets of 2 at 55 for the squat. Then 8 sets of 3, 45%, 8 sets of 3, 50, and then 8 sets of 3, 55. We leave the last week blank because we're anticipating the next week's skill day. I know I was getting some blank stares, so does that kind of make it a little bit more concrete? I'm charging for this program, by the way. First week, Monday, is going to be squat at 85. And then bench at 85. And each week is going to look pretty much like that. The only changes would be you would raise the skill day by 5% for the next week, and then 5% again the next week after that. And everything else is pretty much going to be the same. Something I like to do sometimes is rather than work up to a max on the first week, I'll have them work up to a max triple, just to really start to get their conditioning better. Also, sometimes making back-to-back PRs for 3 weeks is a little tough. So they get a chance to set a 3-rep PR and then just do 2 single-rep PRs. You can decide whether or not you want to do it that way. Usually beginners will make progress all the way through, just because they're just learning everything. One thing Westside used to do, and I know Dave used to do, is he would have you do the first 3 weeks would be one exercise, and then he'd have you do a different exercise for 3 concurrent weeks. The reason I'll do 1, 2, 3 rest, 1, 2, 3 rest, or 1, 2, 3 skill, 1, 2, 3 skill, is let's say I'm coaching somebody online and they do an exercise and they kind of fuck it up. I might not get them properly coached in time for them to do it the next time. So especially if you use sites like elitefts, and by the time you get it on video and upload it on YouTube, and then the turnaround time getting coached, you might not have a week to get all your mistakes under control. So by putting a month in between each performance of the exercise, you have a little bit more time to look at your technique and address your issues and do that. I also think it's easier to make PRs if you're doing them a month apart as opposed to every 3 weeks. Now this is a meet cycle, okay? So what you would do is after the 12th week, you would take these two, actually the 12th week you could still do a light speed workout these days if you wanted to, and then take the entire next week off from heavy training, just do assistance, and then compete. The reason I have the skill days set up the way they are is to mimic attempts at a meet. All right? So 85%, you're looking at that being your last warm-up. 90% is going to be about an opener. 95% would be about a second, and then 100 and up would be your third. So that's why those percentages are set up specifically. Incidentally, I still do that. I don't follow a standard Westside template. I'll actually do the main lifts every month with about the same percentages, 85, 90, 95, compete.